Good morning, everyone. And for those that don't know me, I'm Stephen Church. I'm a partner and a North Market leader at EY. Our session this morning is going to focus on net zero agenda, and I'm delighted to be joined by Helena Anderson, who's the co-founder of Ikigai Capital and board member of the Cheshire and Warrington LEP. Simon Curtis, who's chair of Manchester Arts Sustainability and board member at Manchester Climate Change Partnership. Hayley Dixon as a commercial project manager at Salford City Council, and Jonathan Pinkser, who's director of the Manchester Institute of Innovation Research. And finally, Will Ennett, who's the head of sustainability at TalkTalk. Just a bit of an overview of the session. As you know, policymakers across the region have set ambitious and varying net zero targets across our region, whether that's 2037, 2038, 2040, all the way through to 2050. We've got COP26 on the horizon, and this is a topic that barely is escaping either news or wider media coverage on a daily basis. Delivering on the timetable will require everyone to collaborate, innovate, and rethink how we live, work, and create opportunity for business. So the purpose of our session this morning will be threefold. The first, to explore the opportunity for our region. Secondly, to get the panel's views and perspectives on where we need to focus and prioritise in order to meet net zero targets, and to use this as one of the key drivers of growth in our economy over the next decade. And finally, the third point would be to hear just a little bit more about what's going on across the region, give us all a little bit of an update. So turning to that first point of integration and collaboration, and as it relates to the setting the region up for success, we're seeing that many cities and regions are setting different timings in relation to net zero targets. It feels like everything is gaining momentum. Therefore, more than ever, there's a need and a clear need for the public sector and for business to be more collaborative in order to realise our green economy ambitions. So I'm going to ask Helena, Hayley and Will initially, what are you seeing from the various groups that you engage with? And is integration and collaboration something that's already happening? Is it at the top of the agenda, or what more do we need to do to promote this? So if I'm turning to Hayley first, sorry, turning to Helena first, sorry.
No worries. Thank you so much for the introduction, Stephen. I guess I should start by saying I'm wearing two hats at the moment. The first hat is that I am a board member of the Sustainable and Inclusive Growth Commission for the Cheshire and Warrington region. And I'll come back to how I think that that is really contributing to some of the challenges of delivering net zero in the Northwest. But I also am part of the consortium that has delivered a £1 billion portfolio of projects for decarbonisation of the industrial area around Ellesmere Port. So for those of you who don't know that area of the Northwest that well, it's Ellesmere Port is surrounded by big industry like Vauxhall's assembly plant, NSERC, the glass manufacturer, CFF, one of the biggest fertiliser manufacturers in the country, Stanlow refinery. So very much focused on challenges of decarbonising hard to abate industry and transportation was our challenge. And so I guess both of these projects sort of typify how I think the public and private sector are coming together to address the net zero challenge. And the public sector is taking a variety of different roles in that collaborative approach. And so we work across, Ikigai is a net zero bankability consultancy. We work across the whole country, but I think I'm really proud that the Northwest has taken such a leading role in this area. And the way in which they are leading is in a number of different capacities. They are acting as a single voice in advocating for the Northwest on net zero to central government in terms of the sorts of policy levers that will really benefit and encourage private sector investment into the region. They are acting as a coordinator between public and private sector project initiatives. So that, for example, on the Commission, one of the things that we wanted to identify is where were the areas of net zero that investment was flowing into, and where were the areas, either in terms of timing of projects or the nature of projects, where actually we weren't seeing enough of a focus, so that there was actually an inclusive approach, both in terms of the stakeholders and in terms of the types of projects that were being covered. For example, making sure that decarbonisation of social housing or decarbonisation in the context of natural capital and carbon sinks was getting the same level of prioritisation as some of the really big projects in the Northwest, like the HyNet Blue Hydrogen project, or some of the big renewable power and heat and network projects that we've been looking at. So the other element to the work that I think the public sector is doing is being a first mover. So being the first procurer and scaling up across an entire region procurement for particular types of decarbonisation assets, if I can put it that way. So one of the projects that we've been working on as part of the £1 billion portfolio is with the local authority to procure biomethane and hydrogen for a conversion of their vehicle fleet, so their refuse collection vehicles and their other vehicles, to convert them to lower carbon alternative fuels. So they're actually acting as a procurer, because by doing that, it encourages the private sector to follow. It shows demonstrators and how they are actually being delivering on lower cost or profitability or decarbonisation. And all of that really helps to build confidence within the private sector. And then finally, they're co-investing alongside the public sector in very targeted ways. So not co-investing in the areas where the private sector is perfectly able to fund, but co-investing in feasibility work, co-investing in, early development work where there's a lot of risk that the private sector struggles to manage, and co-investing on new technologies, so first commercialization of new technologies. So in all of those ways, I think the public sector is trying to fill a gap as opposed to own a space. And I think that's a really important message. Government, in our view, should only do what only government can do.
Yeah.
And so that's really the theme that runs through our work on the Commission and our work on project pipeline creation and encouragement of investment.
Brilliant. Thank you. And it's great. I like the procurement and I like the joined up nature of it, because it would be such a big opportunity. I love the fact of if I put words in your mouth almost, that you used feasibility, if I used proof of concept, which is kind of, I guess, providing confidence to the private sector to step in. So it's almost as if there's a combination of building that momentum and then transitioning to allow, to allow all to gather pace and momentum.
Yeah, crowding in is such an important phrase. Yeah.
Brilliant. I've never heard that phrase before, crowding in. Fantastic. I'm going to use that actually. So just using that then, and Hayley, it'd be great to hear, given your role in Salford and what else is happening across Greater Manchester, the combined authority, etc., but specifically what you're seeing and building on some of the inputs that Helena's provided.
Yeah, sure. I suppose at a local authority level in Salford, we're obviously heavily engaged with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority as one of the 10 local authorities that come under that. And we're working closely together with regards to the objectives that are set out in the GM 5-year environment plan. So that sets really challenging targets for our local authority areas of being carbon neutral by 2038, which is obviously ahead of the government target of 2050. And that collaboration allows us to share info and achieve at scale and coordinate a consistent approach across Greater Manchester. But the GMCA are also set up challenge groups that cover specific topics like buildings, energy, resources, etc., that bring together public and private sector partners to address the challenges that we're facing in that area. So as Helena mentioned, filling those spaces that need that additional effort and trialling and demonstrating ways of working in order to roll them out and build them up at scale. Salford City Council, as an example, obviously building on what we've agreed to through the GMCA, we've embedded that approach through to be carbon neutral by 2038 into our policies. We declared a climate emergency in July 2019. We have the Great 8 Priorities for our city, and the City Mayor, Paul Bennett, relaunched that recently and declared that tackling the climate emergency is one of our Great 8 priorities as a city. And embedding that in our local plan, in our inclusive economy strategy, which addresses the priorities around making sure that we're achieving the carbon neutrality, but also growing our economy alongside that and building that resource up, and making sure that the benefit is retained for citizens of Salford. We have a climate action board that is set up. It's around 2 years old now, and subgroups underneath mirroring the GMCA structure, bringing together stakeholders in Salford across all sectors, so like academia, public sector, voluntary community sector, and the private sector, because we acknowledge that it isn't something that we can do alone, that the targets are challenging and we can't do it in isolation, and we need to work together across all sectors in order to do that. By bringing those groups together, what we can see at a local level is that there is a definite willingness to participate, to discuss, to share and learn, that organisations and stakeholders are setting their own challenging, ambitious targets that are prior to the government 2050 target, which is amazing as well, but that we all understand the scale of the challenge and the need to work together and start that journey now in order to get there. And although that's really positive, there's probably more, and definitely more, that we can do to engage with our citizens, to bring them along on that journey, and also more engagement with the private sector, looking at building relationships, building jobs, training skills, and building that green economy side, as well as the obvious benefit of carbon neutrality that we're all aiming for.
Thank you, Hayley. And it's the bit that I really picked up there was the inclusivity part and making sure that it's open to all, not just to participate. And then it's also not just about, I guess, the private sector lens or the business lens to this, but actually relating it into the citizen aspect is really powerful one. So it's great to hear not just the private public sector and volunteering sector as well, but also the citizen lens being applied to this. I think it's very powerful. And makes it really real. So it's great to see that that's what's going on, not just in Salford, but across Greater Manchester. And so having heard that sort of the hybrid, if I say it one way, from Helena around what was happening in the private sector and elements of the public sector, and reinforced with what's going on in the public sector. Well, if I can come to you to get the private sector lens, given your role in Talk, it'd be great to hear just your views on that integration, collaboration aspect.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. So Talk is UK's leading value for money connectivity provider, and since 2019, our head office has been in Salford, and we have over 1,800 staff, in the region. So very much involved in the Greater Manchester region. I think there's two areas around the collaboration. So firstly, we have actually been collaborating with a number of other businesses over the last 2 years through the vehicle Business in the Community. And so our managing director is chairman of the Net Zero Task Force. And that's been both at a nationwide level, but we've also, for example, had local events, including one last week focused on the Manchester region. And in that time, we've created 10 different fact sheets and hosted a range of webinars, with over 1,000 sort of participants and members. What I think is quite interesting when it comes to collaborations, collaboration is absolutely key, and just businesses learning from each other, because it's not, I would say, tackling climate change is not the business as usual competitive dynamic. We do need to work together. What we found in doing the work is probably two ends of the spectrum. So you have lots of businesses who are still struggling to figure out how to measure, how to, just where to start and how to measure. And we've tried to help on that. And that is quite difficult. And particularly, I'm sure we'll talk about, when it comes to SMEs and other businesses, how do they get a handle on that? And then on the other end of the spectrum, what we found is there are some companies who are really far down the track, and now they're getting to some really hard to reduce and hard to eliminate carbon emissions. And so again, that's one where collaboration is probably key, because it's typically an industry-wide problem. So, to give an example on that, over the last 5 or 6 years in our own business, we've reduced what's called our scope 1 and 2 emissions, so our direct emissions, by over 60%. And on top of that, we've now switched to renewable energy. So what we're down to is some really kind of hard to abate scope 1 emissions. And so again, actually working with other people, in our case in the telecoms industry, even hearing from other businesses is really helpful, just to think about how do we get rid of those last elements. And then equally on the other side, we're in the process of validating what's called science-based targets, so an officially recognized international standard for reducing carbon emissions in line with what the Paris Agreement says. But again, it was really invaluable to have that forum, to ask some just basic questions of people and understand and learn from others along the journey. So I guess what we found, both across industry, but also in our own particular cases, it seems to be those two extremes, getting started and let's call it getting finished, where collaboration is most key. And then probably the bit in the middle, frankly, I think businesses can just put their head down and make the changes they need to transform their business.
Great, Will. And I guess just to kind of summarize your contribution there was, I had some top table executive sponsorship, is becoming very, very real, thinking about measurement and articulating that, and also supporting business. So I guess across all of our contributors there around and to our audience, lots of collaboration, lots of activity, lots of energy happening, which is all very, very positive, because actually this decade, I'll call it the moving decade with regards to laying the foundations to make sure that we can hit these targets in 20, whether it's 2037, 2038, and even out towards 2050. So I guess we've almost started, and then to use that as a gear shift and also an appeal to our audience. There may be 7 of us here. If anyone's got any questions that they wish to pose or comments, then please do make it in the chat. We will pick some of the stuff up. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit and turn to the topic of I guess, innovation and exemplar projects, and turning to Jonathan and Simon, given their roles. Is there any specific exemplars or innovations that we can actually physically point at these days and demonstrate, on this net zero agenda, that we are making progress and that we are building the momentum that we need through this moving decade, if you like, towards that net zero economy? And I guess in the same breath, what more should we be doing? So, Jonathan.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. It's always a very difficult question. How much do we need innovation to tackle the net zero challenge? Of course, we tend to focus a lot on technological innovation when we talk about it. We're always somehow hoping that new technologies will save us. And maybe that's a little bit misguided, because a lot of innovation is actually really good old process innovation, business model innovation, how we're doing the normal things in our businesses and in our lives in a slightly different way. The default very often is still using technologies that use fossil fuels. So I live in a newly built house. I still have a gas boiler. The house is 3 years old. Why is there not an electric heat pump there, basically? So the thing is, a lot of these technologies are there, but are not necessarily the ones that are being used. So that is a change in mindset. And that is also innovation, because you basically need to innovate just how you do your normal things in your business. The same good old thing, which is not really popular, but it's very important, the topic of energy efficiency. Just really improve your energy efficiency. I think we all know the housing stock in Manchester is not the most energy efficient. I'm from the Netherlands originally myself, and we're doing slightly better there in parts. Why? Stricter regulation. So that is really, you need to really change that. But it really brings me to this idea of business model innovation. And this is where you see some interesting new things popping up, not necessarily just in the UK, but across the world. So when you look at green electricity, one of the major problems there is that it is being generated in different places. So how do you pull it together? And this is where a platform in the Netherlands, for example, has been very revolutionary, because they basically create some kind of Airbnb type platform where I'm not buying electricity from them. They're just connecting me as a consumer with the suppliers of the electricity. So if a farmer has a windmill or solar panels on their roofs, I can buy it via the platform from them. And this is how you solve some of the problems in a net zero economy, that the technological solutions are spread all over, and we can actually use digital technologies like platforms to make connections between people where 20 years ago that would not have been possible. So linking it to the previous topic, collaboration on these topics between different producers and consumers is easier because of that. But you also have to be very careful in wanting to go fast. What I see as well now is that many people set their targets. That's very important. And really want to show progress really fast, but don't want to make the hard decisions of changing their own business and then jump on the carbon offsets. And that makes me always a bit like, yes, carbon offsets are important. But as some of the previous speakers already said, more so for the hard to abate sectors, those emissions that you can't get rid of, where it is really difficult. Don't use the way out for where you actually have technological solutions like green electricity. So a lot of innovation is not needed. A lot of technologies are already there. So that would be my main message, basically.
Well, thank you. I mean, I must admit, when I think about innovation in this space, I think more of the engineering side of things, to then start to think about what's the Airbnb and the equivalent that you mentioned around just buying your electricity from whoever may be generating. That takes it to a step forward. So perhaps even more, we should be looking at other countries and bringing those innovations into where we are in the UK. Thank you. And turning to you, Simon, is there any the innovations and the exemplars that you're seeing? It'd be great to hear what you're doing and what you're seeing across the region.
Yeah, so kind of just to explain, MAST brings together over 50 cultural organisations across Greater Manchester, and we've been working together for 10 years. And there's some brilliant exemplars that you may or may not have heard about. ITV Coronation Street is made in an ever less carbon impacting way. They've been really innovative and also working with the BBC in terms of BAFTA Albert of decarbonising television production. You know, there's in terms of how they're powering kind of electric vehicles, how they dry the costumes, you know, natural drying of the costumes to kind of real detail. You've got somewhere like Home Arts Centre that's kind of really fully integrated a sustainable approach into their work, which is really exciting. We worked with them to kind of develop a culture sector specific carbon literacy package. I'm sure everybody, well, most people have heard of carbon literacy. And that means you can't engage with Home Arts Centre or anything that it's presenting there without really understanding kind of where they're coming from. You know, you've got Manchester Museum are doing some really exciting things about engaging with communities, knowing that kind of it's really important that we're sharing stories and telling stories and kind of engaging with all of our communities across Greater Manchester, you know, and not just telling a story of climate doom, but also kind of, you know, making sure that people understand that different parts of the world are being disproportionately affected by climate change. We got Walk the Plank over in Salford, outdoor arts organisation. They're doing fantastic things. They've been kind of decarbonising and looking at the impact of fireworks, amongst other things. They're a brilliant organisation. I think kind of one thing we found really interesting, we've just completed an EU-funded project called Sea Change, which saw the MAST model being shared with 5 other European cities. And when we were putting that project together, often on sort of from a city, in a city context, it had been the first time that the person in the city responsible for culture and the person responsible for environment had come together and had a conversation about how they could work together. And that was remarkable. I found that remarkable, but I suppose something sort of unusual happened. Something unusual happened here. But it's been a really fascinating project in terms of how the local authority has supported a sector and then helped them create their own network, you know. And one of the brilliant things about culture is kind of you just sort of set them going and they'll interpret it and kind of present it, you know, understanding that one of the things that we can really bring to the table is meaningful engagement.
Great, thank you, Simon. I didn't actually know so much was going on, and like you say, if you bring it to you know, the culture sector, they'll just take it, interpret it, and use it. And I guess a quick question would be, what more should we be doing to be able to highlight some of those great schemes that you mentioned?
I think kind of one of the things we're doing at the moment is just sort of bringing together on a new site all of those stories, but also kind of it's very important for those organisations, I think, to be communicating their actions through their public facing side of their organisations, because there really is some very kind of exciting things, and I'd encourage kind of any organisation, it doesn't matter whether it's a business or cultural or kind of whatever it is, to tell the story, and to tell the story of the small and large innovation that's happening, because there's lots of small things that are happening kind of that we don't get to hear about, but they're really inspiring and creating a community of people working on the same agenda.
Great. And I guess then just to wrap up those last 20 or so minutes that we've had this panel, we've had a lot. So I'd say that collaboration is happening at every level, from citizen all the way up to big business and private sector, acting as a stimulus within that, and public sector massively contributing and thinking not just on the business lens, but how to connect down to citizens. Lots of innovation. Lots of great examples about big industrial innovation, but all the way through to modern day, you know, the tech, the digital, and, you know, I guess redesigning things like Airbnb that Jonathan you mentioned. So that's fantastic, and I guess therefore that's all live and well, and there is pace and there is momentum in the agenda. But if I then just flip to barriers to success, and let's hear from each of the panel members, just to and I'll come to you initially, Helena, on this, but do you think what's your view on the barriers to getting in the way of us driving through to meet these ambitious targets, and how do you think we can overcome
them? Well, if maybe I give a funder perspective on this. One of the things that I think we've done very well in this country is that we have worked towards decarbonisation of electricity.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're a world leader in that now. And why is that? Well, actually, power is really simple. And investors like simple assets. They like, you know, less complexity, better credit worthiness, easy routes to market to be able to sell the product that you're proposing to create. They like things to look like the old style of infrastructure that they are used to. But what we now have a challenge to deliver is decarbonisation of heat and cool, and decarbonisation of transport, and the delivery of new fuels like hydrogen. And they're hard. They're hard because in some cases the ecosystem that is necessary to make them successful, to deliver it, doesn't exist. So in the case of hydrogen, the whole ecosystem, supply, distribution, storage, demand, the whole thing has to be created from scratch effectively. In the case of heat, when you're delivering heat networks or you're doing domestic heat pumps, you're looking at a multitude of stakeholders who you have to engage with to bring with you. That creates a level of complexity, and it also requires you to think in systems, not in individual projects, but in systems. And the challenge we have is, how do we create the public-private sector partnerships in the broader sense of that term that make it easier for private sector funders to move into those more difficult asset classes and to play a role within a system where that system is well integrated.
Yeah.
And you can do that through various mechanisms on support for long-term stable cash flows, which is what institutional investors want to see. And I think the government, central government, has done a lot more than a lot of other governments to do that. But we also have to recognise that the work that's involved at the beginning of these projects to make them aligned with local strategies and to bring forward local stakeholders to support them in an integrated way across power, heat, and transport fuel, those are risks and work that the private sector finds it hardest to bear, unless they're very large organisations like the big oil and gas companies or the big energy companies. But if we want to bring forward SME investment and we want to bring forward jobs and growth and skills, then the public sector has a role to play in overcoming that feasibility barrier to bring forward storefront projects initially in a way that actually brings forward then the institutional capital once the projects have been de-risked. So I think that is a crucial mind shift, absolutely fundamental mind shift. We cannot keep talking about green power, because when you talk about industry and you talk about transport, you are not talking about electricity.
Yeah, no,
so
definitely.
That would be my...
Fantastic, thank you. So it's a whole system thinking. We're now getting into the hard stuff. And when we get into transport, when we get into heat networks, etc., it's as us back into that locality, it's back into that citizen agenda. Great, thank you. Hayley?
I suppose from my perspective, time is our biggest challenge. These targets are really challenging. And, you know, just picking up on what Jonathan said, the technology exists, it's there, it's been trialled, but the barrier sometimes is the willingness to change, the speed at which we can change, where these technologies become the norm rather than something new and scary, and how we normalise and mainstream some of this technology in order to make sure it's sort of launched and picked up as quickly as possible. I suppose, you know, how we overcome that. We need support from government with regards to planning, housing, transport policy to bring those changes into the day-to-day changes of work and life that we're all, you know, going to have to make. Leading by example, you know, demonstrating how these work, what the benefits are, you know, what at an individual level the benefits are to people by using this new technology, and encouraging that positive adaptation of that technology, and raising awareness of our ambitions and the impact that being carbon neutral will have for all of us, which will be positive overall.
Thank you. So policy, regulation, and lead by example. Great. Thank you, Hayley. And turning to Will, your perspectives on those barriers.
Sure. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I think two barriers. So the first one is, you know, infrastructure, and I think, you know, Helena's talked probably more widely about industrial infrastructure. I think from our industry's point of view, we're rolling out what's called full fiber or fiber to the premise. In our own studies, we found that to use about 80% less energy than traditional copper lines. So it's a much more efficient way of distributing. But more importantly, I think it can harness that decarbonization potential. So, you know, better quality connectivity can drive a lot less commuting, as we saw in the pandemic, but also a lot more smart meters, thermostats, you know, all kinds of smart systems. So that would be the first thing. And then the second area, which I touched upon earlier, is how do we get businesses of all shapes and sizes to have the right measurements in place? Because, you know, even for larger companies, unless you know fully what your supply chain is doing, you can't then take an engagement plan on how to reduce that. And that, as I said, is a challenge that again, through collaboration, hopefully we can address.
Great, thank you. So think about full fiber connectivity, smart systems and technologies again, and that's good. That'll bring us into Jonathan, what you're seeing around some of those technological things that you mentioned prior.
Yeah, one of the main challenges is still scaling it up. You see so many technologies that can work for a startup, and it all sounds good, and we can talk about them and see we have all kinds of projects, but actually making them fit for mainstream markets, for mass markets, is a major barrier, because that really, then you bump into the resistance of, oh, I don't want to change. This is how I do things. And that really is still a very difficult thing, which operates on all levels. Governments are not really willing to go there because if people don't like net zero policies, they might vote against you in the next election. So they're afraid of that. Companies don't necessarily want to change their routines because their routines have made them successful. So why would you want to change them? And we as people have the same thing. Well, yeah, we're all a bit people of habit. Okay, we had to change now, but I have a lot of new habits now, and they're also becoming routines. So it is breaking through those kind of barriers, which really become visible when you start scaling things up. So can solutions actually work for all of us or for the majority and not just for a happy few? Because we sometimes look at ourselves like, oh, but I have a green car. And say, yeah, but most people don't. And then that's one of the major things. I would say the other barrier is really cost versus investment. We still see the cost. Ooh, this is more expensive. Not so sure. Is there a real business case for this? Instead of seeing that it is an investment and the fact that you lower your carbon emissions is value, but it's currently not being seen as value. It is just something abstract. And because of that, it can't be monetized. And then any net present value calculation will not show that it makes sense. So again, there you then need the government. If there's a proper carbon price, then it is monetized. And then you can actually, going back to Elena's point, then investors see, okay, this is why it has value. And that really needs a change in how everything works, the financial market, how government is regulating it. And that is, again, going back to previous points, it's a system change. And that's why it's so difficult, because it's not going to be simple. No matter how we can talk about it in a positive way, it is very difficult actually to do this.
Yeah, and we are moving into that scale world, aren't we? That just not just with the timing challenge that we've got in front of us, but actually the need to scale at pace. So great points. Thank you very much. And finally, Simon, just on barriers, what you see?
So I think some of the barriers can sit within organisations. Where this agenda is being prioritized and where it isn't, and it's really time to kind of be, not adding this into roles, but building roles around this, because that's where the innovation will come from. I think there's a huge amount of information out there, and I think it can be really hard to navigate. And I say this with first-hand knowledge because we've just created an e-learning tool for the culture sector. So I've been hacking through all the information, both locally, nationally, and internationally for the last few months, trying to simplify it, because I think there can be such a wall of information, some of it really contradictory, and that can be a real barrier for kind of organisations not knowing where to start or how to get started. I think, echoing what Jonathan says, we're fixated on a growth model that systemically locks us into this very uncertain path, and that needs to change. We're so very well beyond having our cake and eating it. We need some real systemic change now. There is less cake, and it needs to be more fairly shared globally. So I think we need to be brave about really digging into what is positive growth and what is growth which is just perpetuating the very problems we're trying to navigate at the moment.
Brilliant point around the growth. And I've never actually heard the cake's got smaller sort of analogy that you made. I'm going to use that. I'm going to take that and use that elsewhere. Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, but I would like to, as part of a wrap up to the session and to our audience, we've talked really at pace through what's going on in the needs around integration, collaboration. We've talked innovations. We've had some great examples of things that are happening across our region, which should give us confidence that a lot of things are happening. It's about how we all harness and bring that together. But just to close, I'd like to just hear from each panel member, and I'll probably actually go in reverse order. So I'll probably come to you, Simon, first in this one. It's mainly just from our discussion, what's the big takeaway that you would like our audience to take from our session?
I think kind of that there are many things to inspire us. I would suggest taking a look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They are an amazing sort of launch pad into all kinds of issues of equality and inclusion. And I think they can be really inspirational in terms of looking at your business practice, whatever that is, whatever sector you're in, and really kind of looking at what you're doing and is it supporting the 17 goals. So that would be my kind of sort of thing for people to take away. Take a bit of time, read them, understand them, and see how does your organization reflect those.
Great, Frankie, and a great challenge for all of us on the call at the minute. Thank you. Jonathan?
Really trying to tackle climate change is a strategic issue now. For a very long time, it might have been more an operational thing. And if we do our part, then it's all fine. And it was more like a hygiene factor. It is becoming strategic now for so many companies that no, you need to do better than others on this, and that can really help you for the long term, and it's even necessary. Also, because of global competition, the Chinese are not sitting still. They're moving really fast with new technologies. If we are too slow here, then the new solutions will not come from here. So see it from that strategic mindset.
Great, thank you. So strategic, top of house, drive down and think, actually, there's the disruptor, whether it's China or someone else, the disruptors are out there and they're going to disrupt us if we don't move fast. Great point, thank you. Will?
Yeah, so I think just the digital infrastructure and how we use that to harness net zero, not just the connectivity side, but across all of the smart technologies, how we can harness that as a region to hit the 2038 deadline.
Thank you, Will. Hayley?
I think opportunity. There's massive opportunity in a number of areas to work together, to collaborate, to build new markets, to build new audiences, and work together to make the most of the carbon neutrality ambitions and the green economy that can develop as a result.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And then finally, Helena.
Well, I think my message would be that there are huge opportunities for creation of value by thinking in energy systems. So when you think across vectors and across parties involved, one person's waste can be another person's gold. And when we are talking to investors about coming to the Northwest, the thing we emphasize is that what we're trying to do is create value for the stakeholders, and that is the surest way to encourage investment.
Brilliant. So just to close, I'd like to thank our panel members for such richness in contribution to the conversation this morning. I'm sure you'll agree we've heard an awful lot and been on a journey that's taken us through some of the technology innovations, taken us through some of the engagement that we've got from citizen through to strategic and board level execs, whether you're in the private or public sector, aspects of what's happening across our culture and the landscape, and how actually we can use that in a different way to engage in storytelling, and some real life examples actually from all of our contributors this morning around what's happening, what we're seeing, and how our region will be leading. I mean, we are sort of, I guess, in a unique position in our country, given we've got a heritage in our energy coastline, and we've heard today that it's about shifting away from power and into everything and every day that we do. So, it's been a fantastic session. Thank you all again, members, and I hope everyone enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.